In today's video, guys, we're going to be taking this Eagle 5.7 Hemi to a bare block. We have a completed long block. So yes, this is a 5.7 liter Hemi. This is the Eagle Hemi, so this is the one with VVT in it. 2009 and plus 5.7 Hemis, I believe. So this is a bare block. This was actually on the channel about 6 months ago. If you guys want to check out the videos of what happened to this, we actually had a drill bit stuck in the piston and we had a push out that fell out and this engine wasn't running very well. Brand new cam in it. Some mysteries that we will never understand, like the leaf in the oil pan. But in today's video, we're going to be going from this bare block to a long block, so we'll be having to assemble everything in between. We already installed brand new 5.7 D&J stock bore pistons. We got brand new bearings. We polished and cleaned the crank. So this guy is pretty much ready to go from a bare block to a long block, fully installed and everything in between. It's pretty much, let's just bolt it all back up. All right, so now we got all the bearing caps off. We're gonna put some actual assembly grease on here. We're using some Moly Lube engine assembly grease. This stuff works really good. If you're going to start the engine within like a week after you build it, you can always use engine oil, but this stuff is just an added benefit of Moly. We're going to put a liberal amount on every single bearing cap. And then on our thrust bearings, we're going to hit them with some Moly Lube as well. And then you have a big footed thrust bearing and a small footed thrust bearing. This is the big footed one. You can see how big the foot is. Compared to the small footed one, you can see, the big footed one goes towards the rear of the motor. The small footed goes towards the front of the motor. The slash part right here compared to the flat spot, the flat part goes towards the engine block and the part with the grooves cut goes towards the crankshaft. So we're going to slide this guy in place. Put it on the crankshaft and rotate it around. Just like that. And then installing our small footed one towards, again, slashes towards the crankshaft. And we'll get it on here. Get started. So we got main cap number 1 with the arrow pointing forward towards the front of the motor. And then we're going to do that with all the rest of the main caps. Just getting the bolts hand started. A few threads in there. So now we're going to go through and torque all our bearing caps, starting with 10 foot-pounds, working from our center and spiraling outwards. Now our second go around, we're going to pop this up to 20 foot-pounds. Now we're just going to double check these all to be 20 foot-pounds. Alright, now that they're all at 20 foot-pounds evenly, we're going to put a 90-degree torque on them. So now that we got our big ratchet out, we're going to put 90 degrees on every single one of them, starting with the center and spiraling our way out. So there's our first one, on to the second one. So now we're going to torque our outer bearing cap bolt, our 10 mils, to 21 foot-pounds, starting with the center one. And doing our spiral just like we did with the rest of the bearing caps. And we're gonna go through and just double check all of them to be at 21 foot-pounds. Now that we got our dial indicator set up, we can check our actual thrust bearing clearance. So we're gonna need a screwdriver and a dial indicator, of course. And what we're gonna do with the screwdriver is we're gonna force the crank all the way to the forward position. So you can see we're at about 1,500 right there. And then we're gonna do the opposite and push it all the way back. And you can see we're at about, so that was about 2.5 thousandths right there. Thrust bearing clearance. Yeah, about 2.5 thousandths, 3 thousandths, which is perfect for our thrust bearing clearance. So now we can actually go into installing pistons and rods, flip this block upside down and start putting in our brand new pistons and piston rings and putting our new connecting rod bearings and rods into this 5.7. That the motor's upside down, we're gonna take some clean engine oil and lubricate these cylinder walls on every single cylinder. The first thing we're gonna do is get our brand new bearing installed onto this connecting rod. You can see the little cutouts right there for the tab that's on the bearing. So we're gonna just line this up and slide it into place. Just like that, she's ready to go. We get our piston rings installed already on it. And then this piston, you can see the F's right there. There's also an arrow on the top indicating forward. So we'll let that just chill right there. Get some Moly lube on our bearing just like we did on our bearing caps. And spread that around. And we're going to take our engine oil, pour some on the wrist pin itself, get it on the piston rings, the skirts, and just lubricate that piston up with engine oil, making sure it's worked into all the piston rings and moving the skirt back and forth to make sure we got engine oil in there. Again, on startup, so we ain't got that dry start. So again, we're gonna get that installed with our piston with the F's facing towards the front of the motor. So now we're gonna move our piston rings around so our oil rings aren't lined up, our piston rings aren't lined up. So we're gonna have our oil rings, our bottom oil ring facing this way. We're gonna have our bottom oil ring facing this way, and then our second compression ring we're gonna have facing towards the back of the engine, and then our first compression ring we're gonna have facing towards the front of the motor. So everything's about, compression rings are 180 degrees from each other, oil rings are 180 from each other, and then they are 90 from the compression to oil rings. Here over the top of her, and then we're gonna start tightening it up. Just like that, we got one installed. Line up that connecting rod onto the crankshaft. Just like that. And then installing our new connecting rod bearing. Lining up our tabs. And we're gonna add some more Moly lube because we love our Moly lube. Sure, spread it all on all the bearing caps. And then when we go under there and get this started, we're going to line the tabs up from the actual top of the connecting rod to the bottom connecting rod. This is a crack cap style, so it's only going to go on one way. One connecting rod piston down, and we got 7 more to go. So I'll turn the camera back on when we get all 8 installed. And just like that, we got all 8 rods and pistons installed, and you can see they are all smooth as butter. So we're gonna flip this engine up and start torquing those rods to the specifications that you're supposed to. So starting with cylinder 1 right here, we're gonna torque this to 15 foot-pounds. So now that all these are 15 foot-pounds, we're gonna give them a 90-degree turn just like we did with the head bolts. That's how you torque connecting rods. Alright, so now it's camshaft time, so we can take our engine assembly lube and put it on all our journals. Now we're gonna get this camshaft in. Just be careful not to nick your bearings with the... Be careful not to nick the bearings with the lobes of the camshaft. And just like that, we got our camshaft installed. Now it's time to put our thrust plate on itself, which actually keeps the cam from going forward and backwards. So we added some Moly lube onto the tip of the cam. And we get this guy thrown on here. And then I like to put a little red Loctite on the fasteners just to be extra super safe. So now that we have our one timing guide installed, we have our camshaft thrust plate installed, and we have a camshaft dowel pin facing straight up 12 degrees, and we have the dot on the bottom timing sprocket on the crank facing down at the 6 o'clock position. We can now start installing our timing chain and phaser assembly. There is some nice slashes on the chain if you want to use those. The single slash goes on the camshaft sprocket and the double slash goes on the crankshaft sprocket. We're going to move the camshaft sprocket. We're going to spin it with our hands all the way to the left to get all the slack on this side of the motor where the chain tensioner is, and we're going to pull the pin just like that, and we are timed, ready to go. So now we're going to get our camshaft sprocket bolt torqued to spec, and then we'll move on to installing the oil pump. So we got our non-MDS lifters in. These trays only can go in a certain one way, so you see this one's front and this one's rear. And we got our MDS plugs in. So now we're ready to bolt some cylinder heads on. We have some brand new Mopar head gaskets for this thing. So we'll wipe this down, get all the oil and grease off of it so it's a nice clean mating surface. And we'll clean the cylinder heads, drop cylinder heads on it, and show you guys the bolt torquing sequence. Alright, torquing the head bolts, we got all the head bolts snugged down, and we're going to start in the middle and spiral our way out, just working on the big 15 mil head bolts, and then we'll come back and torque these guys. So the first torque sequence of the big head bolts is 25 foot-pounds of torque. Now that all our big head bolts, our 15 mil head bolts, are torqued down 25 foot-pounds, we're going to work on our little 10 mil bolts that are up top here, and we're going to torque these guys down to 15 foot-pounds. Again, working in a spiral fashion from the center out. Now it's at 40 foot-pounds. So now we're going to get our angle torque wrench out, although it's just a ratchet. These are just 90 degree, so if you have a fancy torque wrench it helps, otherwise just like we did the main caps, we just do 90 degrees off of it. Alright, push rod installation time. If you guys get yourself like a piece of welding wire or a clothes hanger or something, it really helps to hold the push rod into place. And then I always feel push rod, you kind of feel it sit into a cone. So I'm feeling with my fingers, you can like feel the cone, so it like walks up and walks down. So you know it's properly installed into that lifter bore. And then the small push rods are our intake push rods, and that's what we're using the welding wire for. I know what rocker shaft's which is really simple. The intake has a big eye on the rocker arm shaft right there, so you know it's an intake rocker arm. Valve covers are on, timing covers on, harmonic balancers on, oil pressure sensor, oil temperature sensor. Everything is pretty much on besides the intake manifold and the oil pan gasket and the rear main seal. So we're going to lift the engine up on the hoist to get the rear main seal in because we can't sneak it in past that bolt, and won't let me sneak it in with the installer tool. And we need to put that on before we get the oil pan on because we need to RTV all our corner joints. So there'll be 4 spots that we need RTV. 2 on the front timing cover and 2 on the rear main seal cover between the engine block and timing cover, and between the engine block and the rear main seal. Then we can bolt some headers on it, drop the intake manifold on, and this Hemi is almost complete. Here's the rear main seal and the plate itself. We're going to just use the installation tool. It's got a nice lip right there to actually grab the crank. We've already cleaned the crank with some high grit sandpaper, so we should be able to just line this baby up and push her home just like that. So we're going to RTV these corner joints. The corner joints being under here. Right here would be a lot easier to do it. Put the oil pan gasket off, but we already threw it on, so we're going to do it with it on. And now that we have a completed long block, there is just one final touch that we need to put on, and it's sitting right here in all of its beautifulness. A big, bad 6.4 manifold. Boom. And we got a Hemi, boys. We got a Hemi. 1 day to complete, probably, I don't know, 6 hours in the garage to get it fully from a bare block to a completed engine. Of course we don't have a water pump on it because that one's absolutely trash. We do have some Hellcat headers to go on it, but we don't need to throw them on right this second. Make sure to comment if you guys have any more questions that I can try to answer. This is a big beautiful 5.7 liter Hemi. This was a very stock rebuild, stock cam. We just deleted the MDS, and the only thing really performance wise we did do it was bolt a 6.4 manifold on it besides deleting the MDS. Stock cam, stock compression pistons, everything's pretty stock bearings. Regap the piston rings for boost so we can run like 20 plus pounds of boost and make 1,000 horsepower out of it. But it would have been cool if we would have done an aftermarket cam, but maybe in the future. We still got to figure out what we're going to be doing with this 5.7 Hemi. We do have a 904 tranny sitting over there and a 904 flex plate adapter, so we can put the Hemi in something. So comment down below what you think we should swap the Hemi into. I have no idea. It does look awesome though with that 6.4 intake. I love that look, and supposedly the best flowing intake for the 5.7 Hemi out there. So if you guys want to see the complete teardown of a 5.7 Hemi, the link will be right here. We found a drill bit in this one, a push rod that was popped out of it. Someone put a new cam lifters and a bunch of other stuff in this, and there was like a leaf in the oil pan. So I have no idea what originally this motor came out of and who originally worked on it, but she is 100% and ready to go to live a long life as always. But if you guys want to pick up a Racing Ram Fam t-shirt, help support the channel, email me at keepitboosted@racingramfam.com. But as always guys, keep it boosted, and we'll see you next time. Peace!